Up next in the broadcast, in the wake of April's ferry disaster, Korea's prime minister says a new committee combining the talents of government officials and civilian experts will root out corruption and reform the country from square one. And speaking of the ferry disaster, a national audit so far finds that government negligence and corruption contributed to the deadly accident which killed over 300 people, mostly high school students. And the world's biggest tech firm, Samsung Electronics, reports that its second quarter profit dropped sharply to over $7 billion on a slowdown in smartphone sales. Primetime News begins now.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Kang Tae-ri in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. We begin with what we know so far about the causes of the recent ferry disaster that killed over 300 people back in April, with many in the country still very skeptical about the institutions designed to protect them.
Exactly. And the state audit agency released an interim government report placing a lot of blame on the government's own negligence as well as corruption. Park Ji-won has more.
It's around 3 p.m. on April 16th, about 6 hours after the Seoul ferry first encountered trouble. Officials from the Coast Guard and a rescue team communicate about the situation at the accident site. Rescue teams did not even have enough boats to take to the scene of the accident. These soundbites were made public during the ongoing parliamentary probe into the ferry disaster. They add credence to the criticism that authorities wasted precious time in the early hours of the accident because they weren't prepared. The Board of Audit and Inspection also found that information provided on a form submitted by the ferry operator to receive a navigation license for the Seoul ferry was altered, and that the local Maritime Affairs Administration failed to catch it. Cargo was also not reported properly. The ferry operator had reported that 97 vehicles were aboard the vessel that day, but in fact the number was nearly double that, at 185, another factor leading to the capsizing. Some Coast Guard officials stand accused of receiving kickbacks just days before a regulations committee convened to make a determination on the Seoul host license. From corruption and lax oversight to failed rescue efforts, the combination of factors were deadly. Nearly 300 people have been confirmed dead in the tragedy, and 11 people remain unaccounted for. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And in the wake of this April ferry disaster, the Korean Prime Minister's announced plans for a new committee aimed at radically remodeling this country. Choi Yoo-sun reports.
The government has put forth a new plan to have civilians take part in President Park's national reform drive.
Having the government and civilians take part in the National Reform Committee under the Prime Minister's office, I plan to establish a joint participation system.
In an address to the nation Tuesday, the Prime Minister said the committee will gather public opinion on reforms and ways to improve national safety and rooting out social corruption. This comes after President Park pledged sweeping reforms within the government and the public sector in response to April's deadly ferry disaster. Chung added the committee will mainly focus on bolstering public awareness and safety inspections.
After a thorough discussion at the committee, we will finalize a master plan on safety innovation, a blueprint for a safer Korea by next February.
Vowing to set a framework for public reform within the month, the Prime Minister also urged the Parliament to support a swift passage of government restructuring and reform-related bills. A key part of President Park's restructuring plan includes establishing a safety ministry to oversee management of all forms of natural and man-made disasters. Prime Minister Chung, who was retained after he resigned to take responsibility for the government's lax response to the ferry accident, also promised the public that he would communicate better with the people as well as political parties and not hesitate in delivering public opinion to the president. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Korea's new finance minister nominee Choi Kyung-hwan has promised all-out efforts to boost domestic demand to lead the economy out of a low-growth trap. During his confirmation hearing this Tuesday, Choi says he wants to make it easier for home buyers to get mortgage loans from banks. Kim Young-gil gives us a peek at what may be the country's economic roadmap for the remainder of the Park administration.
Finance Minister nominee Choi Kyung-hwan says his initial focus will be removing red tape and other restrictions that make it difficult for consumers to buy a home. In his parliamentary confirmation hearing Tuesday, Choi said one area he will attend to urgently is easing what he called outdated restrictions on housing loans.
Debt-to-income and loan-to-value rules that have limited purchases have been in place for more than a decade, and there have been reasonable efforts to improve the system. We will come up with more reasonable measures.
Choi, who will also be a deputy prime minister if he is confirmed, said the government is requiring banks to excessively limit housing loans, as it has failed to change regulations written more than 10 years ago when there were worries about property market bubbles. Adopted during the housing market boom, the rules strictly restrict the size of a home loan that can be given to home buyers. But the nominee did not say how he would bring the nation's rapidly growing household debt problem under control. Critics say it will only get worse if loan restrictions are eased. Choi said the need to boost domestic demand has become more urgent as the April ferry disaster prompted many consumers to refrain from leisure activities, thereby slowing the recovery.
The economic team will place its focus on boosting domestic demand through increasing household income and improving consumer sentiment.
The nominee also said he was opposed to tax hikes aimed at making up for a revenue shortfall, adding that revenue should be raised by boosting economic activities, not by raising taxes. Choi said when it comes to extra budget, he said the government would take a comprehensive approach looking into the economic conditions and that the government is in the middle of crafting a budget plan for next year. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un limped onto the stage as he attended a mass memorial service commemorating the 20th anniversary of the death of North Korean founder Kim Il-sung. Tuesday's memorial was broadcast live by the state media, and young Kim was shown walking with a visible limp. The reason for the limp is not known, but it is a rare display of weakness from a regime whose leaders are considered semi-divine. Senior military officers and party officials also attended the ceremony, but Kim Kyung-hee, the daughter of Kim Il-sung and aunt of Kim Jong-un, was not present. Also absent was Kim Yang-gun, who is in charge of North Korea's cross-border affairs.
Samsung Electronics' second quarter operating profit is not going to look pretty. Its guidance shows profits falling below the psychologically significant 8 trillion won mark for the very first time in 2 years. What's behind this and what's expected to come? Our Na Hyun-kyung explains.
Industry insiders in Seoul are calling it an earnings shock. Samsung Electronics' second quarter earnings guidance stands at 7.2 trillion won, or just above $7 billion, falling 15% from the previous quarter and down a whopping 25% from the same period last year. The company attributed the lower-than-expected operating profit to a slowdown in the growth of the global smartphone market and a strong Korean currency.
Samsung had a hard time in high-end smartphone segment because Galaxy S5 was not sold well. Second, Samsung did not focus on mid and low-end smartphone market because of price down pressure from Chinese smartphone competitors.
Experts add if Samsung fails to beat off competition from Apple and Chinese manufacturers such as Xiaomi and Lenovo by the end of the year, the results will take a toll on the Korean economy as well, given that Samsung last year took up nearly 50% of the combined net profit generated by all listed companies in Korea. Samsung says the far from impressive numbers are hardly related to its ill chairman Lee Gun-hee, but with the second quarter profit hitting a two-year low, investors are likely to put more pressure on the tech giant's management. 나현경, Arirang News.
Korea's household debt has hit another fresh high, according to the Bank of Korea on this Tuesday. The amount of household loans extended by financial institutions stood at 699 trillion won, or roughly $692 billion as of the end of May. The figure is up $3.8 trillion from the previous month, although the figure has reached new highs for 4 straight months. This marks a slower growth rate than April. The central bank attributed the slower growth to a lower number of home purchases in May.
Disgruntled drivers are pressing the pedal on suing some of the country's biggest automakers over inaccurate fuel efficiency. Last month, the Korean government announced that 2 local automakers, including Hyundai Motor, and 4 foreign brands overstated the gas mileage of their vehicles. Hwang Ji-hye outlines the legal landscape.
Consumers who bought cars with overstated gas mileage are collectively taking some of Korea's biggest automakers to court. As of now, around 1,700 people have joined together for the lawsuits. The overwhelming majority are owners of Hyundai Motors' 2013 Santa Fe SUV, taking up almost 90% of claims. Drivers who own Ssangyong Motors' 2013 Corando SUV and some imported cars have also joined the lawsuits. A lawyer working on behalf of the drivers says he expects the number of plaintiffs to rise and top 3,000.
We believe automakers have a warranty responsibility since the vehicles have a flaw in a key factor that measures performance, and the land ministry has already verified that there is a problem with the vehicles.
The plaintiffs are seeking between $650 to $3,000 each in compensation. The damages they claim include factors like the extra money they've spent on gas and mental stress. But with the Land Ministry and Industry Ministry divided over the correct way of calculating fuel efficiency, pundits are expecting a fierce legal battle. The Industry Ministry says that the difference between the stated and actual gas mileage of the 2 local car brands remain within the legally allowable level of 5%, while the Land Ministry says they don't. Even if the plaintiffs win, it doesn't mean all of the 110,000 people who own the models in question will receive compensation. Only those who filed a claim will receive a payout. That's because Korea doesn't allow class action lawsuits except for those involving securities. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
With the president's latest cabinet nominations dominating lawmakers' agendas these days, there are concerns that the National Assembly is getting behind on pressing ahead with the president's reform drives.
And that includes the hotly contested medical sector. Professor Chung Hyung-sun from the Department of Health Administration at Yonsei University joins us for this conversation.
Now, Professor, welcome. Now, back in March, the president's cabinet approved a measure for telemedicine, but it's actually being stalled at the National Assembly. In the big picture, will the passage of this bill ultimately change the structure of Korea's medical service?
I don't think so, because the telemedicine so far limited between doctors and doctors, but not allowed doctor and the patient. So the new government measure is to allow that for the particular cases like remote area, patient consultation, etc. Right. But that's kind of trend for the future healthcare system. It is not the issue to waiver the whole system, etc. I don't think so.
So the bill itself won't, completely alter Korea's medical system, which has drawn a lot of praise from citizens, residents, and then also expats, and also people who visit Korea for medical tourism. What is it about the Korean medical system that draws such accolades?
Yeah, Korean healthcare system is praised because my interpretation is relatively low payment. But another aspect is the whole population is covered by public health insurance. This too is related. Public health insurance coverage, 100% coverage, we call it universal coverage, population coverage, makes it easier to control the overall cost.
Now, a recent OECD report, I believe, which came out last week, showed that Korea's healthcare costs are rising at a pretty steep rate. But that's not, that wasn't really an alarming report, to be honest, because you were saying earlier that it was because it was already too cheap to begin with. So we're in a pretty good environment in terms of healthcare costs.
Yeah, but we are worrying about also, even though currently it's relatively low, the increase rate is so high, and there is many factors which can boost up the healthcare expenditure. Like, for example, in Korea, so many healthcare services are not covered by public health insurance, which makes people pay, for example, 100%. And another thing is, for example, some patients, inpatient care services, we need their family members or their kids, or they have to serve.
So you're saying like some of those costs that are done by the family members for free doesn't get reflected into the actual real cost of healthcare. So are there some issues with Korea's healthcare system that could be addressed or reformed within the time frame of this current presidential administration?
The current the government's main promise is to enlarge the coverage expansion. That means lower the patient's burden for the healthcare services. For main diseases, the serious diseases, the co-payment part has been already lowered, but the current administration promised to lower more. That's the major improvement.
Okay, well, it seems like the next changes really rest upon what happens over at the National Assembly. Thank you so much for your time and insight tonight.
It's my pleasure.
The Israeli military has launched another round of airstrikes on the Gaza Strip in response to the latest wave of rocket attacks.
With more on that story, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, at least 9 Palestinian militants have been killed and dozens of others injured over the past 2 days, including civilians.
That's right. It marks the highest death toll in years in this conflict, and that figure is expected to rise as Israel intensifies its military offensive against Hamas. Dozens of tanks and bulldozers were seen lining up near the Gaza border on Tuesday in what military officials are calling the first stage of Operation Protective Edge. The move comes as Israel bombarded about 50 targets inside the Gaza Strip with aerial and naval assaults. Hamas has threatened a, quote, earthquake in response to Israel's attacks, while claiming responsibility for some 40 rockets that were fired a day before. The surge in violence has raged since the kidnapping and killing of 3 Israeli youths last month and the murder of a Palestinian teen last week. From Heathrow in London to Dubai International, major airports around the world have begun adopting enhanced security measures for direct flights to the United States. Air passengers bound for U.S. cities will be subject to random screenings to check their electronic devices, including cell phones and laptops. The new measures were announced last week by U.S. officials amid concerns that al-Qaeda-based terror groups were developing bombs that can evade security screenings. However, some say the new measures infringe on their rights.
Bad guys are bad guys, and they'll always find some way if they're really, truly determined. And we'll do our best to stop them, but at the end of the day, we can't If we cease to live our lives like normal people, then they win just the same.
Travelers are being warned that they may be forced to leave behind their smartphones if they can't power them up in front of security agents. This to prove they're not packed with explosives. And finally, turning now to Australia, where Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has arrived for an official state visit in a bid to forge closer economic and defense ties between the two nations. The three-day trip marks the first for Abe since Tokyo reinterpreted the country's decades-long pacifist constitution to allow its military to aid friendly countries under attack. Addressing Australia's parliament on Tuesday, Abe said the two nations were launching a special relationship of cooperation.
Today, Prime Minister Abbott and I will sign an agreement concerning the transfer of defense equipment and technology that will make the first cut, engraving the special relationship in our future history.
Experts say the agreement could pave the way for a deal that would have Japan build a fleet of stealth submarines for Australia. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. Starting at the World Cup, the field has been whittled down from 32 teams all the way down to 4. Now we've arrived at the semifinals and a kickoff with host Brazil taking on Germany. Now Brazil will have a tough task ahead without key players. Star striker Neymar is out with a broken vertebra, while Thiago Silva has been suspended after FIFA rejected Brazil's request to overturn his second yellow card. Manager Luis Felipe Scolari acknowledged the losses, but says his team is ready.
The situation has already passed. We are talking more about it because of you have asked for it. But at the same time, our group has a new focus, a new strategy, and that is the way we have to work.
Meanwhile, Germany is seeking a 7th World Cup final just like Brazil, and they have no injury problems, giving head coach Joachim Löw plenty of options. He'll rely on playmakers like Toni Kroos and Thomas Müller to break down the Brazilian backline, which will likely be reinforced for the match. And speaking of the match, it all takes place on Tuesday at 5 p.m. at Belo Horizonte or Wednesday at 5 a.m. here in Korea. Meanwhile, Real Madrid legend Alfredo Di Stefano has passed away at the age of 88. He died on Monday at a hospital in Madrid, less than 2 days after suffering a heart attack and 3 days after his birthday. Considered one of the greatest to ever play the game, he helped Real to 5 straight European championships and 8 league titles and scored 307 goals in all competitions, good for second on the all-time list for the team. And moving on, the International Olympic Committee has announced the official candidates to host the 2022 Winter Olympic Games. They are Oslo, Norway, Almaty, Kazakhstan, and Beijing, China. The IOC Executive Board named the 3 cities as finalists after earlier withdrawals by Stockholm, Sweden, Krakow, Poland, and Lviv, Ukraine. The cities will have to submit their plans by next January, with the final decision coming on July 31st, 2015. Now let's come back home and get to Tuesday's top KBO matchup between Seoul rivals the Tusan Bears and the LG Twins. Now we go to the first inning. It's the first batter, Jung Soo-bin. He hits one over the right field wall. It's going and it's gone. And in the second, he caps off a 2-run inning with a bunt. It's 3-0 Tusan. Now we go to the bottom of the frame. LG gets 2 as Lee Byung-gyu and Chung Sung-un, they come home. But Tusan replies in the third with 3 runs. But LG is not done. Oh Ji-hwan starts the rally. Kim Young-wi, he brings 2 home. LG scores 5 in the inning to steal the lead. It's 7-6. However, Tucson scores 4 in the 6th to power back and later rack up 4 in the 7th as well. And right now, Tucson is leading over LG 14-8 in the 9th inning. And looking at the other games, we have Kia winning over SK 10-6. Samsung beats Lotte 4-0, and Nexon takes down Hanwha 17-3. Well, that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
Super Typhoon Noguri is passing through Okinawa, Japan, and its effects will be felt here in Korea very soon.
That's right. And for more, we have Bo-kyung joining us from the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, so Jeju is waiting for this typhoon to hit there. When is it going to be?
Well, it is set to hit water south of Jeju by 3 a.m. Wednesday, so that'll be about 5 hours from now. And by 3 p.m. Wednesday, the storm should even be closer, and those in Jeju must be prepared as a typhoon watch has been issued. As a result of the typhoon, we're looking at about 40 to 100 millimeters of precipitation in Jeju, while up to 80 millimeters is forecast for the southern coastal regions, depending on the region. A shower should begin in Jeju and spread up north to the central regions by tomorrow evening. And once again, those down south must be prepared for heavy rainfall and strong winds on Wednesday. On to Wednesday's readings. Seoul hits 32 while Gwangju and Busan reach 27. As for other places, Daejeon soars to 31 while Jeju and Dokdo make it to 26. Last but not least, ending off with World Cup weather, Brazil and Germany are set to face off in Belo Horizonte. The weather condition looks to be nice and sunny with daytime highs peaking at 26. That does it for me for now, but I'll be back with more after midnight.
All right, thank you very much for that, Bo-kyung. And that wraps up this edition of Primetime News. Thanks for watching.
Good night to those of you in Asia, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.